Returning to the levels of organization, we'll move on to the cellular level. Now, cells are described or defined as the smallest autonomous units of life, and this term autonomy means that the cell has control over its own internal workings. Now, because the cellular level is our second level of structural organization, we see that cells are composed of the atoms and molecules that we had discussed in the previous section. We have a lot of cells in our body, so we have anywhere between 50 to 100 trillion cells in our body. So this is a massive amount of cells, and they are all governed and coordinated by activities within the cells and activities between cells. And so cells do a really great job of organizing their own activity, but also coordinating their activity between other cell types in other tissues and organs. So we don't have just one type of cell within the body. We have somewhere around 200 different cell types. And we have this many cell types because cells are highly specialized to carry out specific functions, right? So think back to that principle of complementarity here, where function follows form. And so highly specialized cells are highly specialized to carry out very specific functions. So we see specialization of tasks within cells. Regardless of what kind of cell it is, all of the cells in the human body have the same basic components that make them up. All cells have a plasma membrane. All cells have a fluid-filled gel inside of them called the cytosol, and all cells have organelles within them. So the plasma membrane is a fluid barrier that is composed of the phospholipids that we had discussed in the molecules lecture segment. And the plasma membrane functions as the boundary between the watery environment outside of the cell and the watery fluid environment inside of the cell. The cytosol is the gel-like fluid environment that's located within the plasma membrane, so that is within the cell and deep to the plasma membrane there. Cells also contain organelles, and this term organelle means little organs. So cells have these little tiny organs inside of them that carry out very specific tasks. And we'll discuss more of these organelles in chapter 3 when we get to that point. But just to give you an example of some of the organelles that we're going to see is we'll see the nucleus, we'll see mitochondria, we'll see the endoplasmic reticulum, and things like that. So these are some example organelles that carry out very specific functions within our cells. So that is the cellular level, and we'll spend a good deal of chapter 3 discussing the plasma membrane, discussing the organelles, and discussing the functions of all of those structures. So next, let's move on to the tissue level. So from cells, we can build tissues at the tissue level. And tissues are defined as groups of similar cells with a common function or purpose. We see that there are 4 distinct tissue types within the body. We have the epithelial tissues, which are tissues that line surfaces or cover surfaces and line the body's cavities. So we generally see these at the body's surfaces. And these are highly cellular tissues, and we'll take a look at tissues in chapter 4, and we'll discuss some more specific functions of the tissues and epithelial tissues in specifically when we get to that chapter. The muscular tissues are another tissue type, and their function is to produce movement by contraction. And so we're of course familiar with the skeletal muscles, which help move the skeleton. But we also have smooth muscles located in the walls of the things like the digestive system, where this smooth muscle contracts and helps to propel food and waste through the digestive system. And so regardless of what type of muscular tissue it is, all of the muscular tissues are producing movement by shortening and contracting and generating those pulling forces to move things. We also have the connective tissues, which, as their name implies, they bind, connect, and support the other tissue types here. So for example, cartilage in our external ear functions in supporting the structure of the external ear so that our external ear can function to funnel sound towards the sensory structures within our skull there. And we also have connective tissues like tendons, which help bind skeletal muscles to bones, so that way those skeletal muscles can do their job in moving the skeleton. And finally, we have the nervous tissue, which is a signaling and communication tissue that uses electrochemical signals. These neurons generate electrochemical signals that send very rapid signals through the body and very long distance signals through the body as well. So we see that the nervous system, or the nervous tissue in the nervous system, is a communication type tissue. Okay, so that is the tissue level. We'll move on now to the organ level. Now, for most of this book, or at least most of this class and most of the chapters in the textbook, we'll spend looking at organs and organ systems. And so we'll start here by defining what an organ is, and then we'll look at organ systems. So we'll spend a lot of time in this class looking at organs and organ systems. So an organ is defined as a discrete structure that is composed of two or more tissue types. Now, typically, most organs contain all four tissue types that we had just discussed, but as long as it contains at least two tissues, or two different types of tissues, then it is considered an organ. A couple of example organs here. So this is showing a blood vessel. That's an organ because it has an epithelial tissue that lines its internal surface. It has some smooth muscle within the walls of that blood vessel. The smooth muscle that's within the walls there helps to control the diameter of the blood vessel, which helps control things like blood pressure. And then all of that is wrapped in a connective tissue outer layer, which kind of holds everything together, but then also anchors that blood vessel to other nearby organs and tissues. So we have blood vessels that are organs. A couple of other examples that we'll go through, at least in the next few chapters. The skin is an organ because it's composed of a couple of distinct tissue types there. Bones are organs, skeletal muscles are organs, the brain is an organ. So most of the individual structures that we'll be studying in this class are organs. So that is the organ level. Finally here we'll move on to we'll move on to the organ system level. So this is the second highest of our levels of organization. The organ system, or an organ system, is defined as a group of organs that work together to accomplish a common goal or purpose. So for example, here, in continuing with our blood vessel example, the cardiovascular system consists of the heart and the blood vessels, and its job is to move blood, and blood carries oxygen and nutrients to all of our body's organs and tissues. And so the cardiovascular system works, the heart and the blood vessels work together as the cardiovascular system to accomplish that goal of moving blood and fluid through the body. So the organ systems are not, even though we study them separately, they are not separate. So the organ systems are all interconnected and integrated with one another, because the function of one is usually dependent on the function of other organ systems working with it. So this diagram here, right out of the book, illustrates the fact that the organ systems are not separate from one another, even though we study them separately. They are, in fact, of course, interconnected with one another. So this diagram is illustrating here the integumentary system, which is the skin, is kind of outlining the rest of the organs inside of it here. And the integumentary system's main job is to protect the deeper organs and tissues so that they can do their job. The respiratory system over here delivers oxygen to the blood and removes carbon dioxide gas, which is a waste product from the breakdown of glucose. And so the respiratory system's job here is to move respiratory gases, so that is oxygen and carbon dioxide. The digestive system over on the left side here takes in food nutrients, it breaks them down and delivers those broken down simple building block nutrients to the blood so that our body and our tissues can use them to build more complex things. The cardiovascular system right in the center here shuttles those nutrients and oxygen to all of our body's cells and tissues. And then finally here, the urinary system cleanses that blood by removing nitrogen-containing waste. And it also removes some excess ions like sodium and potassium. So the urinary system's job is to eliminate the waste and the excess from the fluid, the blood. So that is a good example illustrating the interconnectedness of the organ systems. Finally, we'll wrap up the levels of organization by talking about the organismal level here. And so the organismal level represents all of the body's organ systems working together to maintain stable internal conditions. Now, I use this term stable internal conditions very specifically here because this is going to lead us into our next topic, which is a topic called homeostasis.